a large number of whom happen to be prominent Jewish women. So let's have a small cheer and shout out. Nita Lowy, Jan Schakowsky, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and our hero, who is now going to retire, Barbara Boxer. So, in honor of nothing else of Barbara Boxer's extraordinary efforts, we would like, with the help we will be doing, but we would like the help of as many of you as possible right now on working on ohalah. A very steep uphill climb in this climate, but in the last 5 months of work by AJWS and similarly minded organizations in and out of the Jewish community, we secured 15 Republican co-sponsors for this legislation, including, those of you from Southern California, Ed Royce, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Wow. So we intend to go back with that effort, and we want your help. There's lots we at AJWS want all of you at Ohalah to do, but right now I want to ask that you and the large numbers of people that you reach help people to think, to speak, and to act globally. To add into your circles of obligation people way beyond our borders, whatever our borders are, of faith or nationality or ethnicity or whatever. To learn about the needs and the struggles of people on the front lines, to share the stories, many of which are available in our literature and on our website, to help us not only identify the U.S. policies that need to be changed, but the legislators who need help in seeing parts of the world to which they have been consistently and determinedly blind. So, lots of specifics, and then we'll open this up for your questions. I'd like you to take the literature. I'd like you to spend some time with the website. I'd like you to ask all the questions in just a minute that are on your minds. But then I would love for everyone in this room to sign our clergy letter, which is on our website, to urge your legislators to co-sponsor and to pass the International Violence Against Women Act. I'd like you to ask students, congregants, and friends and family to do the same thing. There's a general petition on the website. I'd love for some of you to consider applying, and there's lots of information right here, the AJWS Rabbinic Global Fellowship, which assembles about once every 18 months, a cohort of 18 or 20 people. We have a cohort for rabbis and a cohort for rabbinical students. This current cohort will travel to the Dominican Republic. That's why I gave you the little boost. A year from now, they, and I hope many of you, including those of you who don't apply for the fellowship, will be at our Policy Summit in Washington in May. You will all get invited. And I'd like for you to think about that as one of many ways in getting engaged in the ohalah effort and in the We Believe effort and in the ongoing work that we are doing in and with the support of the American Jewish community. Finally, Grace Paley, another great Jew, once wrote, "The only recognizable feature of hope is action." So let's act now for women and girls, for sexual minorities, for indigenous people, for those around the world who are suffering the worst ravages of oppression, poverty, and injustice. It's our mandate, our responsibility, and the legacy that we can carry forward together into the future. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now I want, in any order, questions, challenges, disagreements, maybe a few testimonials from the people who traveled with us, but whatever you have to offer. And I hope we'll get into some cross-discussion and debate, and I really hope, I know you're doing a lot of sharing with each other, over these 3 or 4 days, but I really hope that some of you who feel like you have engaged communities on some of these issues will share that work with each other.
Ruth, that was incredible as always, and it's amazing how you can just on all 4 of these levels at the same time. This is not yet a question for you, it's just to let people around the room know, as you see demonstrated by our models, the structure, the process is to line up by the closest microphone, and we'll alternate sides speaking. That's beyond my ability.
Hey, Janice.
Thank you, though, because now we know that it has to be higher, and somebody with skill is actually able to do that. Ruth has asked us for questions and challenges and things of that nature, and we, the program committee, asked you to move to stating the question and challenge as quickly as possible without having to restate for us some of the things that Ruth said. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is not, but I'll speak loudly. The question I have is, what gets done to help change the macho, for lack of a better word, culture of the men who are perpetrating the violence on the women? The violence doesn't happen out of nowhere. It's a culture that says men can do these things to women and girls. So what can you tell us about those efforts?
So this is always a troubling moment for people, but take my word for it. There are men, I'm happy to say, and lots of women and girls who are determined to make this change in their own countries. And so all we can do is, in fact, not all we can do, but mostly of what we can do, and mostly what our grant making consists of is, of course, identifying not only the countries in which we work and the themes on which we work in those countries, that's all our prerogative at 36th Street, but then looking for those groups that seem to us, because of their connections, because of their history, because of their passion, because of their rootedness, to use last night's word, in a rights-based approach to development, to have this vision, and then to support them. And so some of them, we support a group called Fortress of Hope Africa in Kenya, which is basically a group of the most gorgeous adolescent young women you've ever seen, writing their own, I'm sure I have the wrong genre, but I think hip-hop music and poetry, and being so good at it that they're now on national radio, and their songs are about basically, wake up boys, stop treating us this way, we'll fight back. So it's that kind of effort, and it happens all over the world. Now, I do want to mention that the passage of ohalah actually would then, if we passed it, get our government to put some pressure on their governments to say some nice version of, if we keep, and I don't want it to sound as crass as it's going to sound, but that's okay. If you keep behaving the way you're behaving, we are going to be sort of the worst looked on country in the world, and is going to jeopardize our relationship with America. Even though we were not ultimately successful in Uganda, we forestalled the first signing of this bill for 3 years because of the quiet diplomacy that we did here that other people did in Great Britain and Canada. I was in Uganda about 3 years after the introduction of the legislation, when Museveni was asked about the bill. Now, I grant you, we lost out eventually, but he was asked about the bill and whether he was going to sign it, and he said, there are important economic development issues in this country, and the only thing I ever hear about from Stephen Harper, Gordon Brown, and Bill Clinton is why, and Barack Obama is why I should not sign this bill. So it worked for a while, and that's the kind of pressure that ohalah would bring. Ivan?
Thank you, Ruth. I have a question. Living in Memphis, Tennessee, where our legislature, after losing in the Supreme Court, put forth a statewide Amendment 1 to say that nothing in our state constitution would declare restrictions on abortion illegal. In a sense, going around the backs of the Supreme Court justices, and it won. And it succeeded. And there was tremendous pressure on us as rabbis to speak out against the bill from most members of our congregation, and yet there were a significant number of our congregation who were in favor of the amendment passing. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how we navigate that middle ground where we want to be fully in favor of these issues, but also recognizing that Israel is a complicated people.
It is. I mean, this is what I hope. I looked at your program for the next 3 or 4 days, and I was exhausted. I'm going to speak about Haiti in Los Angeles tonight and going back to New York City tomorrow, because it's easier than what you're up to. But I mean, I really think this is the issue on which you have to engage with each other. I mean, I'll say some things about it, but I'm very eager to get rabbis engaged in doing this work, and I don't want to get any rabbi fired. So I think, not that most of you have jobs, I'll lie, but I think a piece of this is what your training programs and the seminaries need to be talking to rabbis about as issues that get raised during hiring. We are not supposed to be a faith that doesn't grapple with difficult issues, but there are economic pressures and power pressures. I spent all of the last 3 years, I think I once said this to Mark Holloway, waiting for that synagogue in which when I stood up to explain that the enemy of international food aid was the shipping industry, someone would stand up and throw a tomato. But at least I don't get fired, I just get tomatoes. Anyway, it didn't happen. But I think it's critical, and I really think, and I was enjoying a conversation among some of you last night about how you're teaching and about the structure of the High Mitzvah program and other things like that. I think some of this is stuff you have to talk about is how do you build it in? You build in 2 things. One is, can you move people from the positions that they've grabbed onto because of their political party, because of their friends, because of their family, because of whatever? Can you move them? That's one question. And the second question is, can you develop congregations and communities that recognize, this is now my words, that Judaism has survived for 6,000 years because the rabbis wrote down every disagreement. And so there's a piece of that there. It's like some of us think this and some of us think that. I'm your rabbi, I'm going to tell you where I'm at. But the tendency, which by the way, some of our, speaking, identifying with you, some of our co-congregants or our congregants want, is for these issues never to come up. And I got myself in trouble once at the Dad Shalom in Potomac, Maryland, because I was a scholar in residence a long time ago. But I was in scholar in residence for the weekend, and they asked me just one thing: please don't mention this local interfaith organizing effort, because it's very powerful, and we're very much a part of it, and it's really angered some of our congregants. So could you just not reference it? So I did very well at Kabbalah Shabbat, and in the Drash, and at the Oneg, and I got all the way to Sunday afternoon. I was supposed to be doing a question and answer session, and this lovely woman put up her hand and said, like, I used to love this synagogue because I could come here and pray, and it was really quiet and peaceful, and now every time I come, there's an argument. I forget the name of the Maryland group, but there's an argument about this group. Would you agree that that should not happen? And I said, no, because it's Jewish. So, I mean, I think it's a tough issue. And I love to sort of hear how people talk about it and grapple with it. But we all know that our political positions, our votes, all of that, are very much shaped by things that suggest that we don't always think these things all the way through. So sometimes a discussion, I'll tell you one other story, I'm terrible about stories. But about 10 years ago, when I was very new at AJWS, the Central American Free Trade Agreement was in Congress. And actually, to be honest with you, I shouldn't have done this. We were not ready to take a position on it, even at AJWS. But I urged the board to take a position against the Central American Free Trade Agreement. And a member of the board, I brought in speakers for and speakers against, all the things you should do, and a member of the board put up his hand and said, we can't possibly be against the Central American Free Trade Agreement. And I said, why not? And he said, sorry anybody who's insulted, he said, because the American Jewish Committee is for it. Yeah. So I said, true. They represent large business interests in this country. We represent Central American farmers. They're for it, we're against it. So I think it's just talking about those perspectives. Yes?
Hi, thank you for teaching us and inspiring us. Kind of a niche question. Many of us and the people we serve have the means and interest to travel. And whether it's for ecotourism or beautiful beaches or safaris and adventures, visit and spend money in some of the countries with bad human rights records. They and we want a wonderful vacation. We're not going as human rights advocates. So I'm wondering, what you think our message should be to them and to ourselves. How should we address this in our personal conversations and from the Bima?
That's a good and tough question. I guess I may be gonna give you a wimpy answer. I would only suggest that you ask them to know what's going on. It's great if somebody can decide, I'm not taking this offer, but I get challenged because I take people to some of these countries and they're, oh my God, you're gonna have 18 people on a study tour spending money in a country in which girls are being raped in the streets. And I'm, yeah, but we're there to do a piece of work. And if you understand the history of this country and you understand the work we're doing and you meet our grantee and partner organizations, you're going to come back to the United States with a whole different perspective on these issues than before. So it's easy to advocate travel with me, and I do definitely do that. Taking donors and potential donors to Mexico in June and to Cambodia a year from now. But I think that probably if they're looking for countries, you could suggest that they ought to pay attention to human rights records. And there are lots of indices of human rights records. The HDI, the Human Development Index managed by the UN, is quite clear on that. But if they've already bought their tickets and signed up, I would just ask them to do a serious piece of history, understand some of the issues, and think about where they might go and where and how they might want to raise it. I mean, a country that's rising on the tourist index like this is Cambodia, where I'm going a year from now, where I've been several times. The official guides who are licensed by the country in Cambodia don't mention the genocide. So, so there are consequences. So anyway, I just think it's important to try to engage. I love the question. Yes.
So there are two of us here from North Carolina who have been very much influenced by Reverend William Barber's concept of fusion politics, which he didn't create, but it has been very important in our state. And Barber is certainly, in my opinion, one of the most important civil rights leaders. The idea behind it, of course, is to talk about what we agree on and to not really deal with the things that we don't. I saw that before when I was on the Commission of Social Action, and David Saperstein and I were working with, of all people, Sam Brownback, on the Darfur issue. Okay, so I was just thinking about the Act, the International Violence Against Women Act, and what the current construct of the Congress is, and how AJWS could really help us. And this is my idea, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it later. But you could really help us on this. A lot of us who don't live in San Francisco or maybe Philadelphia have representatives now who are very, very conservative and evangelical. And I believe that, as we did with Brownback on the Darfur issue, if we could have a strategy as rabbis and as Jews and as clergy as to how do we talk to evangelicals or serious Christian representatives and from the AJWS, and then go in and not talk to them about anything else but that, we could really do something. In our district in North Carolina, the newly elected congressman is a Baptist preacher. And I think that with the right approach, there might be a way to do that.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. First of all, for those of you who don't know about Reverend Barber, don't know about the Moral Mondays movement, I mean, you should pay some attention to, because there are our own examples of grassroots efforts at social change. There's everything you said is correct about the importance of agreements across faith lines on issues we can agree on. Okay? The reason that I vow is only a page and a half long and doesn't mention the word health and abortion is intentional. We re-scrubbed the legislation 3 times with those wonderful members of Congress that I spoke about, so we can say, no, you can't find it, it's not here. You want to be on a campaign on that issue, that's fine, we're going to agree to disagree, but that's not what this is about. And I would go way beyond even what you said, although I know it's what you do. I would look in meetings with other clergy to look at their faith backgrounds, look at their congregations. You know, I won't tell this story because it would take too long, but we changed a piece of legislation in New York once, it was a long, long time ago, by only talking to the recalcitrant male elected officials who were standing in the way, by how the current situation was affecting their daughters. I promise you there's no other way in which we would have moved them. It felt ridiculous. but it worked.
So if AJWS could help us with the strategy, that, for me, would be very helpful.
We would be delighted to do that and work with you. And I would just want to say that I talked to you about getting Ed Royce, so the email from my executive director in LA, which talked about the success of the Interfaith Coalition that got the audience with Royce and then got his support, that email headline is something like, what happens when a rabbi, 2 rabbinical students, a nun, and an Episcopal priest walk into a congressional office?
Ruth, I've very much admired the way in which you've taken the immediate suffering of people in the, as you said, halavai, developing world, and turned it step by step into policy questions, including Washington. You did it with the Farm Bill. You are now doing it with the Violence Against Women Act. It's already clear that a good bit of the suffering of the developing world is coming out of the climate crisis, and more is going to be coming out of the climate crisis. So I'm wondering whether you see some process by which, at some point, you will, you in singular and you plural, AJWS, will take on at least the piece of the question of whether the United States makes major contributions to communities in the developing world to deal with, to mitigate, or to develop in a way that does not worsen their own suffering from the climate crisis.
So, with huge respect to one of my, and all of our distinguished teachers, this is the mark of a true organizer and activist. I could have gotten up and talked to you about my grandchildren's favorite Lego toys, and he would have asked if I could connect it to climate change. However, there is a small piece of the answer. I want to say the not negative, but the limiting piece first, Arthur, which you and I exchanged emails about several months ago, and that is running an organization which I'm very proud and happy to say has grown a lot in the last 15 years. We've done it at some points by being overly entrepreneurial and too widespread. And in the last 5 years, we've been very specific and strategic and focused on what our countries are, what our themes are, and most particularly on what our work in Washington is about. Because otherwise, we're too small and we become too diffuse. That said, we think, and I'm happy to send you some material, that some of the work that's going on behalf of sustainable farming and much of the work that's going on about issues of land rights, the good news is that the grassroots groups that we support already have a global alliance. You know, sometimes you have to say thank God for the web. So there's an organization called Via Campesina, which is the way of the farmer or the peasant. And they're all talking to each other, and they're all fighting in every possible way and at every possible level, just on the issue of people owning their own land so they can grow what they need and not turn it over to large outside interests whose use of that land would hasten the negative effects of climate change. So there's a piece of it that we're already doing.